Welcome to our podcast today. Today we are talking about climate change. This is the climate clarity segment where we get to talk about matters climate change. And today we're going to understand or break down for you keywords that are used in climate change arena. And today we have an expert who is going to break all these terms for us. I'm your host, Sally Miruri, and today we are joined by Evan Sabondo, who works at Pamoja Trust as a program officer, who has specialized in matters environment and also holds a bachelor degree on environmental studies from the University of Nairobi. So, Evans, karibu, and
sana,
make us
Sally.
understand these words.
Asante sana, Sally.
Yes.
I have to put a disclaimer that I won't be so detailed in terms of description, because it's my wanting that people should understand what these environmental terminologies and at large what environment is, this climate change things we are hearing about, the global warming. So I'll try to simplify it and if possible use examples that we are all familiar with.
Okay, so maybe we start with the words that are always used interchangeably.
Yeah.
That is climate change and global warming. What is really the difference? Because there are people who say global warming, climate change, same and one thing.
Yeah,
Tell us
sure.
what's the difference.
So in simple terms, global warming is as a result of the increase in our temperatures globally, which we understand has other repercussions, have devastating effects globally. So global warming is basically the increase in temperature. And we're currently talking of 2 degrees Celsius, which is the target in terms as far as COP is concerned, that is Conference of Parties. So when you're talking of global warming, it's in simplest form, the increase in the average global temperature that will now need for us to maintain so that we don't surpass, because anytime by any chance we surpass the average global temperature, then it means there are a lot of repercussions that we are going to effects that we are going to have as a globe. So currently we are talking of 1.5, which is the level that the threshold that we're supposed to maintain globally. But again, now we are talking of a target of 2 degrees Celsius that we are not supposed to surpass. And that if we surpass that temperature, then the repercussions are going to be dire. Climate change encompasses a lot of things. So climate change is the change of weather patterns over a long period of time. That is as a result of such instances as global warming, as the change in temperature, increase in temperature. So climate change looks into different weather elements, and not necessarily temperature, but it looks into our rainfall patterns. It looks into the seasons, the cold seasons, the long seasons. It looks into the drought. It looks into even the kind the temperature going down, either going down or going up. So in simple terms, climate change looks into the different weather variables and not only temperature, as is the case with global warming. So in simple terms, global warming is the increase in temperature, but climate change is looking into the different weather patterns, the change of these different weather elements over a long period of time. So that, for instance, if we are people who are used to having rains maybe from April, the long rains in Kenya, for instance, are from April to July, then it means now due to climate change, we either have prolonged rain seasons or shortened rain season. When it comes to our short rains in September, October, and November, instead of us having the short rains as is the norm, we are having prolonged rainy seasons. When it comes to in January we experience a lot of hot weather in Kenya, for instance. Then we either have a difference in terms of maybe having rains in January, something that is not obvious, or maybe the kind of heat we have in January is intense compared to the normal kind of temperature that we are used to. So it's a change in the way our weathers our weather occur, in a short period of time and also a long period of time. That would be the biggest difference between global warming and climate change.
So, what really causes climate change?
Okay, so climate change is caused by two different parameters. Number one is the anthropogenic causes of climate change, and the second is the
What is anthropogenic?
Anthropogenic means human, so they are human induced. They are caused by human activities. So climate change is as a result of global warming. Global warming is a result of the emissions that we do when we do conduct our different industrial activities. Number one being, of course, the use of fossil fuel, that is oil, as a means of driving our economy, driving our engines, driving our vehicles. So, of course, even the extraction of fossil fuel emits carbon. The refining of the fossil fuel emits carbon. Using the fossil fuel in our economy already is a carbon emitter. Apart from that, we as human beings, we have our various activities that leads to emission of carbon. When we are engaging in agricultural activities, for instance, when we are tilling the land, we are releasing so much carbon into the atmosphere. When we are cutting down trees, it means now the carbon that is supposed to be, because the natural system is in a way that it's a cyclic system. But now cutting down trees means we are breaking the cycle. So it means the carbon that is being emitted by human activities is not being absorbed back to the to the natural system, that is the trees. So cutting down the trees means carbon is in the atmosphere. Industrialization processes, there's so much chemicals being produced in our industries. We are producing plastic in large quantities. We are using vehicles that are emitters. In our urban settings, we are having different activities. We are using charcoal as a means of energy. We are constructing buildings, and all that is. So
there's a lot of factors that
factors.
Climate change.
Those are now a factor. Those are now activities that leads to emission of greenhouse gases. Now, once these greenhouse gases are emitted, then they lead to global warming. Once they lead to global warming, now global warming leads to climate change, because it means now the temperature is increasing because of course, the distortion of the atmosphere. And then now once the atmosphere is distorted, then the sun that is reaching out, the Earth's surface is distorted. Then it means there's so much climate change. You're going to experience a lot of floods. You're going to be experiencing a lot of droughts. Extremist in terms of the weather patterns that we are used to.
Okay, so now today we are diving into the key terminologies in climate change. That's the basic terminologies that you need to know when you're having climate change conversations. Evans has already defined to us what the difference between global warming and climate change, and also the causes of climate change. You said that there are those that are anthropogenic, that's what anthropogenic, and those that are natural. You've not mentioned the ones that are natural, but also as you tell us the natural causes of climate change, there are these also two terminologies that have always been used interchangeably again. That is adaptation and mitigation.
All right.
How are we adapting? How are we mitigating? Is it the same thing? What does it mean? Give us examples.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
But you start with the natural examples.
Thank you, Sally. So I mentioned that the anthropogenic ones are human-induced. The natural ones are those that occur due to natural phenomena, like what? For instance, volcanicity. The volcanic processes emit a lot of gases, carbon dioxide being included, nitrogen being included, hydrogen sulfide being included. So once this process occurs, then the eruption then releases a lot of gases into the atmosphere, and they equally lead to distortion of the atmosphere, hence global warming, which now leads to climate change. We have other induced, we have other natural processes like landslide, for instance, that of course also leads to release of the carbon that has been trapped. Then we have wildfires that burn our forests, and once these forests are burning, then they release a lot of carbon. We have earthquakes, that leads to shaking of our earth core, and all that process leads to emission of gases. We have the cyclones and tornadoes that happen in the ocean, that then releases so much vapor into our atmosphere. then that vapor in some cases fall down as heavy rainfall, especially in the areas of Namibia, in the areas of Mozambique. That one is a very common scenario. So those are some of natural processes that leads to, change in our weather patterns, the change in our climate, and all that.
So what about the adaptation?
So there are these terms known as adaptation and mitigation.
Yes.
But again, of course, I'll add other words. So when someone tells you to adapt, it means these processes have already occurred. These activities, these scenarios are here with us. Then now the option we have is to live with these things in mind. To live with, let's say, for instance, if it's hot weather, the hot weather is here with us. We cannot reverse this process.
So it's like we are trying to adjust
to our lives to fit, the current situation that it is. So that is adaptation. So there are many ways of adapting. Number one, for instance, if we are living in a very hot area, then it means we'll have to design our houses in a way that they are coolant. Nowadays, we understand there are very many different types of house designs, especially through the alternative building technologies, that you find now that houses are built with materials that makes the house cool, especially in early afternoons when the sun is so extreme. When there's so much temperature, the house is a coolant in itself, in that when you are inside this building, then you don't feel that extreme heat. That is a way of adapting. Another way of adapting, especially in the agricultural sector, for instance, we know that the rain is not with us. There are areas where rain has been cut completely. They are experiencing a lot of drought because of these climate change effects. So in such areas where there's no rain at all, especially in the global south, where talking of the sub-Saharan nations which have really been affected by the drought, you find that the way to adapt to these drought conditions is through irrigating your farms. So when you're irrigating your farms, it means you are now not depending on the rain, but now you are using water from a different source to irrigate your land, so that you're able to reap something from the land. That's an adaptation measure. Mitigation is trying to reduce the occurrence of this particular scenario in the near future. For instance, planting of trees. The reason why we plant trees is number one, we plant trees so that they can help in absorbing the carbon, the much carbon that has been emitted into the atmosphere.
So when you're mitigating climate change, it's like you're reducing the
You're trying to reduce emission. You're trying to prevent that scenario from occurring. So you plant trees so that the carbon can be absorbed. Once you absorb the carbon, at least you're trying to ensure that the global warming is reduced. The temperature is not increasing. When you plant trees, for instance, trees are known as windbreakers, for instance. Trees are also known to act as a coolant, especially in our urban settings. So in an area where the trees have been cut down completely, there's so much heat, there's so much temperature because the sun is hitting that area directly. But once you plant trees, you'll find that the area becomes cooler compared to an area that has no trees. So that is a mitigation measure. You're trying to put trees so that you control the temperatures there. That's another mitigation measure.
So there's this other term, again, that is commonly used, carbon footprint. So what is carbon footprint? And do you have, now that the footprint is, everyone has a footprint. So do you have a carbon footprint? What is carbon footprint? Let's make
so everyone has carbon footprint. Carbon footprint is the amount of carbon you emit as an individual in during your day-to-day activities. For instance, if you are driving, your vehicle is emitting carbon. So that amount of carbon can be measured and said, Sally, for instance, this is the amount of carbon Sally today has emitted.
So
today.
we have all caused climate change.
We are all enablers of climate change, unless we deliberately put interventions to ensure, for instance, if I use vehicles to get to work, then I'll cycle. If I am using tillage in agriculture, then I will say, let me use regenerative agriculture for my farming, so that at the end of the day, I'm not emitting any carbon. In whatever activity I'm doing, I'm not emitting any carbon to the atmosphere. So carbon footprint is basically a value that is put in regards to the amount of carbon you are emitting as an individual. Yeah.
So how do the people understand that they need to reduce their carbon footprint? What are some of the things, like 2 things that someone can do apart from the cycling to work that you mentioned, that someone can do to reduce the carbon footprint?
Okay. So number one, awareness is very key, because people do not really understand the impact of the activity, to the climate, the relations between the activity and the current scenarios that we're experiencing globally. People do not really understand that. So there's need to, and engage people just to have this conversation so that people can reduce their carbon footprint. So apart from using I'll put it generally as a non-motorized transport system. That is to mean that apart from vehicles, you can either walk to your work point, either cycle to your work point, or use electric bicycles, for instance. That means you've not used a transport system that is emitting carbon. That's number one. In your house, for instance, there are devices that you do not need. Well, of course, this modernization has brought so much of people thinking they need devices. So you'll find that in your house, you have refrigerators, you have all those kinds of, you have washing machines, you have all those equipments in the house emit carbon in one way or the other. So the best thing you can do is to try, if you don't need to use them if you don't really don't need them.
Yeah. You've made us understand the difference between mitigation and adaptation. Just going back to the definitions, I'm just thinking: are there climate effects or impacts that maybe cannot be mitigated and cannot be adapted to? And how are we looking at it when it comes to conversations on climate change?
Okay, there are those impacts that have already occurred that we cannot reverse. And that's where the loss and damage comes in. Loss and damage is basically, for people to understand, it's basically a reparation mechanism. So that due to climate change, maybe for instance, the climate change, this extreme weather pattern has really affected my way of living. It has affected my economic activity. It has affected my social life. So then it means I can't reverse this because it is a occurrence that already happened. Then that's where the loss and damage comes in. So there are those effects, there are those impacts of climate change that cannot be reversed. For instance, if floods occur, especially in low-lying areas, floods occur, and maybe I am farming in this particular area, and then all of a sudden we have floods, and then this water just decides, mimi sitoki hapa, nitakaa hapa kwa hii shamba ya huyu jamaa. Like what we've seen in many cases. The case of Budalangi currently, there are places where the water has just settled there, and the water is not retreating back to the lake. The areas like, for instance, in Nyalenda, where we have settlements that have been submerged completely, and the lake is actually...
Well, they're claiming back its...
Claiming back its...
People say it's claiming back its...
Yeah, its spaces.
But when you say claiming back, it means that was...
It was initially a lake.
Yeah,
it was initially a lake. Yeah. Only that, of course, due to still climate change, the lake size shrinked.
So in that scenario, you can't adapt.
You can't adapt.
You can't adjust your life,
no, you
and
can't.
you cannot mitigate.
Okay, one option would be, for instance, we've seen this in places like Philippines, where people construct houses that are raised, so that now on the bottom of the houses it's just a floodplain. But how safe is that? How ethical is that? So instead of you competing with water, and nature always takes its course. Instead of you competing with nature, the only option you have is to shift from these places. Now, these are things that you cannot reverse.
Yeah, currently, there is Kenya actually, I don't know, amended its Climate Change Act. It was amended. We didn't have, we had one, but it was amended. And some of the new introductions, or some of the things that were added into the act was carbon credits. I think that was one of the major things that was added, carbon credits. And in many communities, there have been discussions of carbon credits. I mean, it's exciting to most communities. So what are these carbon credits? Is it beneficial? Is it something that communities should have an interest in?
Okay, carbon credit, in the short run, people are benefiting from carbon credit, but in the long run, it's actually not the ultimate solution.
So what is this?
Basically, carbon credit is a kind of pass. It's a permission that is given to the multinationals, the industries, to continue emitting, but in a condition that they support or facilitate mitigation and adaptation measures in this other sides of the country or of the world that are not emitting carbon. So carbon credit is more of it's transactional, where one individual is given the permission to emit carbon, but again is also given that permission, but with a precondition that whatever profit is making from his industrial activity is supposed to be recouped back to a community somewhere to facilitate adaptation and mitigation. Of course, it has a lot of controversies. Activists are not welcoming it as a means to mitigate and adapt to climate change and global warming. It has its shortfalls. Like for instance, if you are emitting carbon in America, and then we are giving you the pass to continue emitting in the spirit of you facilitating adaptation and mitigation measures, we are not guaranteed that your carbon is actually being absorbed back in Kenya, for instance. So it's not a guarantee that the carbon you are producing is the carbon I am absorbing in my farm.
But it would have been absorbed.
We are hoping that it will be absorbed. But now, the safari that your carbon makes from America to Kenya, no one can be able to measure that. That is number one. Then secondly, carbon credit, we are seeing it leading to so much displacement of indigenous communities, because now it means the government will have to protect some lands with the confines that we are protecting this land so that so that it can help absorb some of the carbon that is emitted by someone else in Asia, for instance, or in Europe. So what you see that you find is that companies in Arabia, companies in Europe, companies in America are purchasing land in Kenya in the spirit of protecting these reserves as carbon sequestration mechanisms. In the name of actually absorbing carbon so that they continue emitting. And for us, that is not really making.
I think we need. I understand. I think it's clear that the aim of this could be to deal with it's mitigation. It's almost mitigation, but I think we need to maybe in future get into conversations of what's really the aim of having carbon credits. The geopolitics of it and all that. I think that could be a good conversation for another day. But there are also countries. You said the countries are contributors. The countries you talked about your causes or your impacts when it comes to climate change as a country. And people have talked about is it called the natural determinant contribution, the NDCs? What does it mean? And what's the role of really countries when it comes to climate change?
So natural determinant contributors are targets that are set by a nation. The Conference of Parties brought up this term so that countries could be obligated to have activities specifically to address issues climate change, because these global treaties are not binding, most of them. Like all of them are not binding. Countries can either decide to adhere to these conventions or not. So then the Conference of Parties then brought this term, national determinant contributors.
The COPs,
Conference of Parties is the COP, which is a UN.
That should actually be like another keyword that we learn. The COP, as we've always had it, means the Conference of Parties.
Conference of Parties. It's a gathering where countries come together to make pledges on efforts towards mitigating climate change, but again specifically trying to mitigate, not really mitigate, but ensure that we don't surpass the 2 degrees Celsius. So what are measures countries are putting in place? That's one of the major agenda when it comes to the COP. So the COP came with this term just to push countries to have deliberate interventions towards addressing climate change. So this will be 5-year programs that the country is supposed to put in place to show that they're actually addressing issues climate change. So every country points out key thematic areas. For instance, we'll say in Kenya, the government will say in the water sector, we have this and this and this to try and mitigate climate change. It's mitigation and adaptation, right? We have this. For instance, when it comes to the water as a sector, we'll say one of our determinant contributor is to protect the water catchment areas. The we have water towers in Kenya. We have nearly 6 water towers in Kenya. So Kenya will say one of our NDCs would be to protect these water towers, and they'll put down strategies on how they're going to protect these water towers. And when they're doing this, they also have to put in place the aspect of community engagement, community-driven initiatives, and all this comes into a component that is usually known as a nature-based solution. That is those are solutions that are put nature in the forefront in terms of when now we are doing conservation. So a country would have a broad, a profound, strategy on how they are going to address some of the issues. So they lay down like 10 parameters, and each parameter is of course linked to a sector. So they'll say in this sector, this and this and this is what we are going to do to try address issues.
Are these NDCs reviewed? Is it?
These NDCs are reviewed after every 5 years.
After 5 years.
So,
by who?
When they go back to the Conference of Parties, they're supposed to report on the achievements they've made.
Okay.
Like now they'll say in these 5 years, this is what we had pledged to do. So after the 5 years, this is what we have done. And now, after the 5 years, we are supposed to now advance.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think those are majorly, unless there's a key term in climate change field that we are forgetting, but I think those are the major key terms that are commonly used when it comes to climate change discussions. And the one that is mostly interesting to me is loss and damage, which I think we should have another segment and maybe break it down. Like, for example, what are the reparations? If you can't adapt, you can't mitigate, what are the reparations? When there is loss and damage, how advanced are the conversations even at the international level when it comes to loss and damage? I think that's it. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe. We're going to share all our, what are they called? Social media platforms here below. I think, we will surely do that. So be sure to subscribe and share with your friends, and also engage in these conversations. Tell us what you want to hear from us, or you want us to expound on. That's it from us. Until next time.
Adios.